Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this Wednesday webinar sponsored by Imanami. This morning, we're going to be talking about Active Directory best practices, automating the user provisioning process. My name is Charles, and I will be your host during this broadcast. At this time, I'd like to turn things over to our presenter, Jonathan Blackwell, Product Manager at Imanami. Jonathan, it's all yours.
Thank you, Charles. Thanks for the great introduction. I'd like to welcome everyone this morning or afternoon or wherever you happen to be to this webinar. As mentioned, my name is Jonathan Blackwell, and I'm pleased to be the presenter on this very important topic. We hope that you're able to learn from this presentation and take away a few golden nuggets. One of the things that we really enjoy here at Imanami is helping organizations such as yours solve what can be sometimes very difficult challenges centered around Active Directory provisioning. Real quickly, let's go over today's agenda. We'll talk quickly about what is identity management, specifically when it comes to provisioning. We'll talk about onboarding new employees into Active Directory, mailbox provisioning, ensuring Active Directory accuracy as moving forward. We'll talk about how management hierarchy can play a role in good best practices when it comes to provisioning. And then we'll talk about the effects of employee role turnover, basically what it becomes tenured access. And then as an employee leaves your organization, we'll talk about the deprovisioning process, and we'll summarize with some best practices and recommendations. And if anybody who wants to stay online are welcome to do so and answer questions. We'll do the best to answer those questions that you would have. All right, first thing, talk about what is identity management as it relates to provisioning. Well, identity management, access management, security, etc., is a complex problem to solve. But the basis for identity is simple. It's really about you, who you are, and what you do, and what you need access to in order to remain productive while maintaining confidence and security. The solutions that solve identity really come from a fragmented industry. But when you focus on a key pain point, such as the provisioning process, you really need to focus on how to best solve that specific pain point. Because the rest of the identity solutions to benefit you, in order for all these things, such as single sign-on, all these other things surrounding identity, it is important that through the provisioning process, the information is accurate. And that's why provisioning becomes really the first key tenet to good identity management practices. So before we get too far into the presentation, I have a quick poll question. And the poll question is, how are you provisioning in Active Directory right now? And there's a couple different possible answers that you could have. And if you go to your poll panel, it should pop up on your screen right now, and you'll be able to answer this question. And we'll give you guys a second here to answer those questions. I can see here the poll results as they're coming in. All right, and it looks like the majority of you, are in fact using HR or their hiring manager informs somebody, most likely in IT, that there is a new person on staff. That's good, actually, good information. All right. Now that I have a pretty good understanding of how people are provisioning, we can address some of those specific needs. As mentioned, close to 60% of you are using manual methods. In other words, that HR or the hiring manager is informing IT. Now, how is IT actually leveraging that information once they're being told? Are they manually provisioning them? The traditional methods at manually provisioning a person is prone to error and can be very manually intensive. Verbal communications are slow. They depend on verbal accuracy if it's done through over the phone. If the provisioning process not only includes account creation but also includes group membership inclusion, you're likely to experience issues with inaccuracy in terms of application, access, and lack of important information as it relates to their user account. A ticketing system that you could use might help the situation partially because the part of that process, the communication, the status are automated, but the actual implementation when it comes to provisioning users is still a manual process. As we mentioned, we talked about the fact that most of the people who are on this call, which is no different than those who we speak to in the industry at large, most everyone is doing something in a manual way. Either HR, the hiring managers is informing, and it could be either through verbal communications, through email, or some ticketing system. All of those methods are manual. Because they're manual, they're prone to error. Even when that information is accurate within the ticketing system, for example, but less error prone than verbal communications, it requires manual intervention. It requires someone to do something. And when you involve a third party to do something on behalf of somebody else, there's always the chance that there's going to be errors. There's also a time to productivity issue that is also realized. There's a couple other methods as well. You can implement through a meta directory, basically moving your new hires through another directory service as a mediary. But those types of solutions become quite complicated to implement and are actually very expensive. And you're basically implementing a middleman tier where another subdirectory is being created in between your HRIS system, for example, and the actual directory where you're making people productive. And then another common method is to build scripts. Long term, they aren't supportable. They become very complicated as the business needs grow. All these different traditional methods become expensive and complicated. It doesn't have to be. There are lots of ways that you can get around that. And the one thing that we always recommend is to use a purpose-built tool that is out-of-the-box implementable in your organizations. All right. Provisioning with an Active Directory accurately is key. It's very important. And it's important to do it quickly. It's important to do it quickly so that your new users are productive right away. The last thing you want to do is to bring somebody new on board and have them wait before they can actually do things. And then on the flip side, as an employee leaves the organization, you need to to remove them from the directory right away. You don't want them to have access to their email and access to VPN and other resources after they've been after they've retired or they've been walked out the door. That's the last thing you want to do. And if you're counting on somebody to do these things, then it becomes a real problem because it may not happen right away, or it may not, or the wrong person, the right person doesn't get to it right away. On average, a user needs to be provisioned in 16 directories upon hiring. On average, a terminated user is only deprovisioned from 10 directories. You can see and do the math there that there is some gaps there where there are people who have access to resources that they really shouldn't be after the need for deprovisioning. So doing this properly is both a productivity and security enhancement benefit. Some of the benefits of doing provisioning in an automated way and providing ongoing synchronization is the obvious increase in productivity, because people can take advantage of communications immediately, can get access to the resources they need to be productive. When HR creates a new entry in their system, they should be able to immediately get access to Active Directory. They should immediately have an email address, automatically get added into the security groups and distribution lists that make them able to perform the duties for which they were hired. And they need to be added to other systems outside of the directory that would make them productive as well. And then through automation, you eliminate the model that produces produces errors through natural human mistakes, and you also eliminate the amount of time that you're wasting on that new hired employee, their ability to be productive, their labor hours. So let's talk about provisioning in general. Provision is more than just creating a user account. I know that's the basis when we talk to our clients. The first thing we engage them with is, getting an account created in an Active Directory. Well, that's just a start. To really make them productive, there's a couple other things that we really have to do. First thing we have to do is, after creating the account, is to make sure that they actually have a mailbox so they can send and receive emails. Very few types of employees can be productive without being able to receive communications and send communications. Then you need to synchronize that information with other applications and other sources that would need, credential information or information about that employee in order for them to remain productive. And then, of course, granting them access into the security groups that govern and control the applications, that can control access to SharePoint sites, that control access to file shares, and then, of course, include them in distribution lists so that not only are they getting personal email communications, but they're getting communications that are destined for the department that they're working in and for the office building that they're in. It's important that they are provisioned in all these things. So provisioning a new employee is more than just creating a standard account inside the directory. You got to do all these things. And if any one of these things becomes a manual process, then you're introducing significant risks for error. So what are the provisioning steps? Well, a new hire needs an Active Directory account. Provisioning primarily occurs at three critical points in an employee's relationship with enterprise: when the employee joins, when they change jobs within, and when they leave the enterprise. In the first of these, we call this onboarding. Provisioning sets up an employees with access to business systems that have capabilities appropriate to that particular employee's job function. It is imperative that the employee starts on day one with all of the business resources needed to be productive. Delays in receiving access means lost productivity. When an employee transfers from one role to another within that same enterprise, provisioning should remove access to the business systems that's no longer needed. Thus, you reduce the risk that the employee will be able to access that information inappropriately, while also doling out the new access that the employee needs to be productive. And then finally, when an employee leaves the enterprise, provisioning should remove all the access, thus reducing the risk that employees can access the systems after they separate from the enterprise. And of course, provisioning is not just limited to just employees. It can be used to provide and manage access to business systems for contractors, partners, and potentially even customers. A well-implemented and a well-run provisioning process takes the manual effort and the guesswork out of granting the right access to the right people. And really, that's it in a nutshell. Granting all the right access to all the right people. And make sure your processes have all three parts: the onboarding, the transforming or moving, and the deprovisioning. From a security standpoint, the latter two are probably the most important rather than the first. Even though we've been, this topic is on provisioning, provisioning really covers the entire life cycle of an employee. Speaking of life cycle, in many organizations, Active Directory provisioning consists of a series of manual processes and emails and help desk calls that ultimately finish with an employee having a network login. And hopefully they have an Exchange email account. It is ripe for potential errors and just not a good use of limited resources. You can see up here this, trying to remember the name now, such tip of my tongue. Let's see, but then when we use these manual processes, the problem gets exacerbated in each step. For example, giving a person an offer letter moves them from the person to an employee. Provisioning an Active Directory account turns the employee into a user. To move them from a user to a productive user requires access to resources, something that would be defined by membership in groups. That's why we find the traditional definition of provisioning and deprovisioning to be so limiting. Organizations want a user with an Active directory's user account? Do you think they want that only? No, they don't want a user that just sits at their desk and types their password and possibly browse the web. They really want them to be able to access the applications, be able to send and receive the messages that are part of their department, etc., etc. Okay, let's talk about some best practices and then our recommendations on how you can fully implement provisioning and truly implement a life cycle for all of your staff. The first thing is to ensure accurate data. Accurate data in Active Directory is essential for security and productivity. Active Directory synchronization should be able to, using schema detection, for example, detect changes in either the source and then replicate that change into the destination, or do it in a bisynchronous way where you can take information from your directory and put it back into the HR system. And then whether you're using SQL or Oracle or some other data source in the back end for your HR system, that information can always be reflected accurately within Active Directory with a good purpose-built tool that would provision those particular users in your system, leveraging that authoritative source. According to a recent survey by Osterman Research, the average organization, IT doesn't know to deprovision an account for about 9 days after the user has left the organization. 9 days. And on average, 5% of the users in Active Directory are no longer employed by the organization. This is a security flaw. Our synchronized product reduces that 9 days to near real time. And assuming that the authoritative HR source is accurate, our synchronized product can remove those 5% of people that are no longer employed. Those same issues occur in the inverse for new employees. If IT doesn't know to provision a new account for 9 days, what is that employee even doing? Probably nothing on a computer. But by using our products to provision new users to Active Directory and Exchange, those new employees can be up and running immediately. Well, let's talk a little bit about internal turnover. The same survey reported that on average, 19% of employees change job responsibilities every year. All that information needs to be put into Active Directory. New job title, new location, new billing codes, and on and on. And then by utilizing our synchronization tool, you can get that information into Active Directory and any other important systems, such as your financial system, CRM, etc., in near real time. Understanding how your Active Directory reporting hierarchy works is an important key tenet to properly managing workflows for approvals, to managing structure for hierarchical dynasties. So it's key to understand the relationship of your employees to the managers. You know, where permissions are set by security groups based on their reporting structure, for example. Even a simple web-based phone directory that leverages Active Directory can benefit from the knowledge of your reporting structure. So it's important that this information be accessible and reflected in your HR system. Most likely it is. And then when you provision accounts in Active Directory, that information, that reporting hierarchy gets reflected in Active Directory. That way, if you're implementing employee lifecycle, then this particular information becomes key for HR. Group ID Synchronize, the tool I mentioned before, is a bidirectional synchronization engine. It utilizes a very intuitive GUI to build out scripts that you can create jobs to provision and deprovision and synchronize multiple data sources. Imagine Active Directory being your hub and becoming the accurate source for all data. Our Synchronize directly connects this data source with another through a job that moves data in updates and transforms it in real time. Does not use or require a staging area or a meta directory. A job defines the connection information needed to access each data source, how that data is related to each other, and how the data should flow. For example, let's say you have an employee information stored in an Oracle table, and you want to update users in Active Directory with this information. You can easily do this by simply launching Synchronize, creating a new job. The job wizard would walk you through the process. You first create the connection information to Oracle and then to Active Directory. Then you map out the fields in the table to the attributes in the directory. And then Synchronize will analyze the data between the two and give you the option of provisioning new accounts when there's new entries in, or removing accounts when entries don't exist. And you can also provide data transformation between them so that if you need to combine information, calculate, evaluate information from one to generate information on the other side, that you can do that. It becomes a seamless way to get information from an authoritative source, thus making your Active Directory become your new authoritative source. Once you have accurate information in Active Directory, the next step, an important step, is to use our Automate tool, because membership within groups is part of the provisioning process. It's a part of ensuring that new employees or employees that are changing roles are provisioned and granted access or have their access removed. It's all part of that provisioning and deprovisioning process. Of course, accurate data is essential to making this work correctly. Automate will ensure that a user is in the correct group, and if the user's data, such as like the department, the job title, location, is correct, they'll get added to the appropriate group. This, this implementation further enhances security and productivity because their membership in groups, especially for those employees who change roles within an organization, their access to those applications and resources reflects their current role. The last thing you want to do is to have somebody included in the VPN access group for an employee that has left the organization. By implementing purpose-built tools that will bring employees on board and synchronize their ongoing changes, then leveraging that accurate information as it changes through membership automation, we ensure that all of the provisioning processes are done, that there is no, that we reduce the chances of human error, and then fully realize the entire life cycle of an employee within your organization. If your organization is having somebody create user accounts manually, it's a lot like asking an accountant in today's day to use a paper ledger. They use computer software. They use things that would help automate, to help ease their task. A really good IT worker isn't going to create a user account manually. They're going to use tools that are going to make their life easier and reduce the chance that they'll be held responsible for mistakes and errors. And so with that, I'd like to thank you for attending and open up to those who are online to ask questions.
Great. Thank you very much, Jonathan. Again, if you have a question, please chat them in using your GoToWebinar control panel, and we'll get to those as many as we can over the next few minutes. So, Jonathan, let's kick this off with differentiating between employees and contractors. What's the best and easiest way you can differentiate between them?
That's a good question. It's one that we frequently encounter with our clients, and that is a way to differentiate between employees and contractors. Sometimes they come from a common data source, a common HR system. Frequently, they'll be disparate systems. One of the nice things about a purpose-built tool such as Group ID Synchronize is that you can integrate with multiple authoritative sources, and then depending on which source or which information, there are distinguishing characteristics either in a common HR system or in two different HR systems, that you can have that information reflected in Active Directory by populating an attribute that would reflect their employee status. Maybe it's a unique employee ID number. Perhaps it's a unique extended attribute within the user's profile. And with that information properly populated in the Active Directory user profile, you can use that information to button down, access to membership in groups. Because one of the things with automating group membership, for example, leveraging this active information in Active Directory, is I can, create criteria and rules for membership that would grant access to contractors on a limited basis, or perhaps put them into groups with temporary membership rules. There's all different kinds of things that you can build on top of that. As long as I have a clear indicator from my source data as to who's an employee and who's a contractor, then I can leverage that information to great benefit to my organization. One of the problems that one of our customers had one time was they were all jumbled up. In fact, this company leveraged contractors to a great degree. Something on the order of like 50% of their full-time workers were actually paid contractors, but they needed to, for benefits purposes, to distinguish between them. And sometimes they got jumbled up, mixed up, because contractors might eventually become full-time workers, or full-time workers might become contractors. That information was being accurately reflected in HR, but it wasn't being accurately reflected in Active Directory. And through our synchronization tool, they were able to eliminate all those human errors that come as a result of people changing from one group to another. It's a good question. Thank you.
Thanks, Jonathan. Next question. So where does role mining fall into this process?
That's a good question. Now, roles, there's a couple different terms that people have that are used in the industry. One we talk about, role-based access. Another one we call attribute-based access. At a granular level, attribute-based access is the same as role-based access. The difference is that roles are a culmination of multiple attributes. So, for example, I might want to, if I need to granularly grant access or define a role by defining a set of attributes, I can do so through in the provisioning process, and then in the provisioning of a user account. And then as the role changes, obviously their associated attributes will change, and it's those attributes that we leverage in the further provisioning of access to resources. And so you may define a specific person role based on a set of 10 attributes, for example, and building an evaluation of those attributes, we can build out permissions. And the fortunate thing is rather than having to do this one by one and a user by user case basis, usually you define the role at once and you say, okay, I need, for example, all my new employees that are going to be working in this department to have this role. They're going to have these attributes set as a part of their onboarding process. Thus, HR will have that information entered into the HR system. And then on the back end, the IT workers will create permissions and grant access to applications through security groups with membership based on criteria that's established in the automated group membership process. And that way, as users get provisioned and the roles are defined through a set of attributes, those attributes are evaluated and then they're put into the correct groups. And because this can be configured just once, then automatically, as new employees come on board, they automatically get their accounts created and they automatically get put into the security groups and distribution lists based on the role that they were hired to perform in.
Great, thank you. Next question coming in. How easy would it be for the main source to make a name change and for it to synchronize or update an AD account and email address? Can that be done?
Yes, it can. A couple different things. So when we tie an Active Directory entity, let's say we talk about a name change specifically, you have to have some common characteristic that ties that particular user entity in Active Directory back to the HR system, for example. In almost all cases, from our experience, has been an employee ID or some other unique key that's common. And so what many of our customers will do is they'll use the employee ID attribute in Active Directory to map in the unique ID that comes out of the HR system. And then what happens is when HR makes a name change, let's say someone gets married and they assume the name of their spouse, or whatever the case might be, and they change a name, then that name gets updated into Active Directory. And then as far as email address is concerned, because that email address is tied to, and depending on the provisioning process, either provisioning them a new mailbox, which you really don't want to do, but most typically is that you would be leveraging a messaging system that has recipient address policies based on these name attributes. And so as the, let's say for example, using Microsoft Exchange, you have a recipient address policy that would typically conjugate or concatenate, first name and last name, and would take those new properties that are changed and then basically create a new proxy address for that person. And that can be done, fully automated. And we don't have to wait for the messaging system to do it. You can actually make that a part of the process of identifying name changes and making that part of our synchronization process in the product as well.
Thanks, Jonathan. So this is product specific around Synchronize, which you were going through. Can Synchronize place users into groups when they are created or provisioned? Is that automatic?
Yes. So we have two different products that address group membership in a different way, and they really have different purposes. In Synchronize, yes, you can assign a new user into a group, but for ongoing membership changes, we recommend, this is the best practice, to use group automation that would base membership on intelligence. The role and attribute based access that I was referring to just a few moments ago. Because Synchronize can create a user and put them into a group initially, put them into an OU and put them into a security group, for example. But for ongoing group membership changes, you'll need the Automate tool to recognize the attribute changes and making those membership changes dynamically as they occur.
Next question coming in is, your presentation focused on AD and integration with Active Directory. What about systems that don't operate through AD, such as legacy ERP systems? How does Group ID handle such a situation? What becomes the system of record?
Oh, that's a good question. Okay, so the Synchronize tool, I'll be very honest that the majority of our clients leverage this tool to connect disparate systems to Active Directory, but it doesn't have to be that way. It is a tool that can map and transform data between any two disparate data systems. So, for example, if you have an ERP platform that's running in Oracle and you wanted to leverage that and use that to populate information into a generic LDAP directory, you could do that. We've had clients, one of our larger clients, use our product regularly to map data between an Oracle database and a SQL database. Just mapping, and using it for synchronization in terms of delta changes, because our product does such a good job of that, and handling a large number of records. So while it's designed with the intention of provisioning accounts in a directory service, it can be used in a number of ways, and I'm always surprised by the way that our customers are using our tool in ways that we hadn't imagined, because it is, while it's designed to be very friendly and has wizards designed for the provisioning and deprovisioning process, it can be tweaked and used to connect any two data systems together. So if you want to leverage an ERP platform, let's say your ERP system maintained customer records, and you wanted those customers that were in your ERP system to be you have contacts generated in your LDAP directory. Well, we've had customers do that. If you had a CRM system and you wanted, all of your leads to come in as, Active Directory contacts, and you could do that. There's any number of ways in which the product can be used, but most people are using it for the things I had mentioned earlier, and that is to provision new user accounts, new contacts, and deprovision, and then ensure that the information is continually updated.
What about duplicate names? How does that get handled in the system?
That's a good question. So there has to be some unique key. So in order to avoid collision, you would use an employee ID, something like that, to ensure the uniqueness. If you're using something that is not a unique key or there is collision, such as when in the provisioning process, sometimes you may want to, let's say you need to create the SAM account name for those who are familiar with Active Directory practices. It could be, the names could be similar, even if the employee ID is different. Well, there's some logic that is built into our tool, and there's additional inbound and out-of-bound scripting that can be added into our product as part of the transformation process, where you can do collision detection on the fly and then set up the rules on how to handle it. So you can there's a number of different ways in which to handle it. So you make it match whatever your business process is. So most likely you would, if you had a human doing something and they have some known process, they increment a number, whatever those things, those same types of policies can be done inside the software, but in an automated way, so that it's not something that you as an IT worker would have to worry about. It would just do it the way that you wanted it to, and would do it automated every time.
What about leveraging Group ID for the enforcement of compliance policies?
Well, there's a lot of different compliance and regulatory issues, so that's kind of that would be a mouthful. So there's lots of ways that we help organizations realize compliance. So, for example, there are, let's say, for example, that you worked in a healthcare institution, and to ensure, HIPAA compliance, that you only allowed people that had certain job titles, nurses, doctors, etc., having access to certain applications. You wouldn't want the orderlies or the administrative staff or like that to have access to healthcare information. That you could limit application access through security groups, and then you can limit membership in the affected security groups based on job title or job code, the type of attributes that define their role. And so leveraging these tools, ensuring that the information in the directory about them is always accurate, and then further provisioning them into the groups that grant them access to things, to applications or resources that are governed through regulatory means or through other forms of compliance requirements, is achieved through this automation process. Basically, getting the information that we know about our employees, taking that information and populating as attributes to their user profile, and then leveraging those attributes for granting access and revoking access.
Great. Jonathan, thank you for your time. There have been a number of people who have been asking about a recorded version of this and or the slides from today's presentation. I'll be sending those out to all attendees within the next 24 to 48 hours. Also, there are a number of questions coming in specific to Group ID Synchronize or getting a demonstration. We are offering demonstrations and a free 30-day trial. You can head over to imanami.com, and that's imanami.com. And you can get a trial or request a demonstration right there. Additionally, for integration specific questions and or system requirements, you can head over to imanami.com/group ID and get more information there. Jonathan, again, thank you. And to all the attendees on the call, very much appreciate you joining us today. This webinar is now concluded. Appreciate it. Enjoy the rest of your week.